Hey guys, tonight we drift slowly into the long, measured history of silk. A material that begins as a delicate filament in Neolithic China and eventually becomes one of the most important commodities in world history. This is not a story of luxury alone. It is a story of administration, agriculture, technology, and the steady expansion of trade networks that connect entire civilizations. Silk becomes a diplomatic instrument, a tax resource, a military payment, and a cornerstone of early manufacturing. It travels through caravan routes, protected by states and regulated by merchants, each piece documented in ledgers, tariffs, and administrative orders. Throughout this calm journey, we follow how a single natural fiber supports entire bureaucracies and influences the relationships between distant empires. So get comfortable, allow the pace to slow, and let the long history of silk unfold gently, one thread, one system, one century at a time. If you enjoy quiet, factual, historical storytelling like this, feel free to subscribe for more calm documentaries. The earliest history of silk begins long before the formation of dynasties, long before organized states, and long before trade routes stretch across Asia. Its origins lie in the quiet routines of Neolithic agricultural life in the Yellow River Basin, where early communities cultivate millet, domesticate animals, and gradually develop specialized crafts. Among these crafts, evidence emerges of an activity both delicate and technically demanding: the rearing of silkworms and the production of fine thread. Archaeological discoveries at sites such as Jiahu, Qingtai, and Weiyang provide the first material traces. Small pieces of woven fabric, preserved under layers of soil, show the fine texture characteristic of silk fibers. These fragments, examined under magnification, display uniform filament, thickness, and the level of craftsmanship that indicates skill rather than experimentation. Bone needles found in the same layers reveal the presence of textile work, and carbon dating places these artifacts several millennia before the rise of the Shang dynasty. The earliest confirmed silk threads appear in tombs from the Yangshao culture, dating to roughly the 4th millennium BCE. These threads, extracted from the soil during controlled excavations, show the unmistakable smoothness of domesticated silkworm fiber. Their presence, alongside pottery, stone tools, and ritual items suggests that textile production already plays a role in daily and ceremonial life. Although the archaeological record cannot reveal the full scope of early silk use, it shows that a long process of domestication and technical refinement begins in this period. Domesticated silkworms, Bombyx mori, cannot survive without human care. They depend on controlled feeding, temperature regulation, and protection from predators. The existence of silk at Neolithic sites implies a structured system. Mulberry trees, cultivated near settlements, larvae tended by trained individuals, and cocoons harvested at the precise moment when the filament reaches maximum strength. These tasks require consistency, patience, and knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Excavated spindle whorls and loom weights from the lower Yangtze region indicate that weaving technology advances alongside silk production. The materials differ across sites: clay, stone, and bone, but their function remains constant: to regulate tension and control thread thickness during spinning. Their placement within dwellings suggests that textile work becomes a regular household activity, integrated into the broader rhythm of agricultural life. Silk, in this early stage, coexists with hemp, rami, and other plant fibers, each used for specific purposes based on strength and availability. Tombs from the Lianzhu culture offer further evidence. Fine silk ribbons, preserved in humid soil conditions, appear alongside jade objects and ceremonial tools. Their inclusion indicates that silk has already acquired symbolic value. The material's sheen, strength, and ability to take dye make it suitable for high-status garments and ritual uses. Although the Lianzhu culture leaves no written records, the arrangement of grave goods shows that silk becomes a marker of distinction, produced through specialized labor. By the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age, silk production becomes sufficiently established to influence settlement patterns. Archaeological surveys reveal clusters of mulberry trees in areas where ancient communities once lived. These patterns suggest intentional cultivation rather than wild growth. The coordination required to maintain mulberry groves reflects a growing level of social organization. Households or small groups tend the trees, gather leaves for feeding, and prepare larvae at the appropriate stages of the life cycle. The technical process of unwinding silk filaments, delicate and precise, also develops during this era. Early tools made of pottery and bamboo demonstrate the methods used to extract continuous threads from cocoons. The process requires careful timing. If the silkworm emerges naturally, the filament breaks, rendering it unsuitable for fine weaving. Ancient producers therefore intervene at a specific moment, preserving the integrity of the cocoon and ensuring a long, continuous thread. This level of control indicates a mature craft practiced across generations. As early societies develop basic forms of hierarchy, silk begins to function not only as a material for clothing, but also as a resource within emerging systems of exchange. Woven pieces, belts, and embroidered bands appear in differentiated burial contexts, suggesting that access to silk production may be concentrated within certain families or lineages. Yet the archaeological evidence shows broad familiarity with the material, indicating that its production, while specialized, is not fully restricted to elites. No written records survive from this earliest period, but later sources affirm that silk eventually becomes associated with particular regions renowned for their production techniques. These traditions trace their roots to the Neolithic settlements, where the craft first emerges. The continuity seen in tools, weaving patterns, and mulberry cultivation suggests a stable transmission of knowledge long before states began codifying textile production under administrative control. By the time China transitions into the Bronze Age, the foundations of silk culture are firmly in place. Mulberry cultivation, silkworm domestication, cocoon processing, thread spinning, and weaving form an integrated system. This system develops quietly, without external influence, within the boundaries of early Chinese communities. Over time, it will support the economies of dynasties, supply distant trade routes, and become a commodity recognized across continents. But its beginning lies here, in the early settlements along the Yellow and Yangtze rivers, where careful hands tend fragile larvae and unravel filaments that will one day connect civilizations. As we move from the Neolithic period into the era of early Chinese states, silk begins to take on new layers of meaning. The Shang dynasty, emerging around the 16th century BCE, leaves the first written evidence of a society that understands silk not only as a textile but as a material woven into the political ritual and symbolic life of the court. Excavations at Anyang, the last capital of the Shang, reveal fragments of silk preserved in bronze vessels, jade cases, and burial chambers. These fragments, though fragile, show complex weaving patterns. Twill, plain weave, and the earliest examples of brocade-like structures. Aurical bonnet inscriptions, the earliest form of Chinese write-in mention. Clothing and textiles used in ceremonies. While the inscriptions rarely specify materials, the context suggests that silk plays a significant role. In rituals honoring ancestors and deities, individuals approach altars wearing garments reserved for sacred occasions. The sheen and softness of silk give it a status apart from other fibers, marking it as suitable for communication with the ancestral realm. Its presence in elite tombs supports this interpretation. Silk is placed with bronzes, jades, and weapons, forming part of a carefully arranged assemblage intended to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. During the Shang period, silk production becomes more organized. Workshops identified through excavation contain tools for spinning and weaving, often situated within palace complexes or histatas residential areas. The concentration of textile tools in these spaces suggests a degree of administrative oversight, possibly reflecting the role of the royal household in controlling key resources. Silk, valuable and labor-intensive to produce, becomes a commodity whose manufacture supports the ritual and political needs of the state. When the Zhou dynasty succeeds the Shang around 1046 BCE, silk's role expands further. The Zhou adopt many Shang practices, but develop a more systematic approach to governance, codifying relationships between nobles, officials, and local rulers. Within this structure, silk becomes a medium of exchange and a marker of hierarchical order. Early Zhou texts, including passages preserved in the Book of Documents and the Rites of Zhou, reference silk as tribute paid from regional lords to the royal court. These contributions include bolts of plain silk, dyed silk, and embroidered pieces, each carrying specific symbolic weight depending on color and pattern. The Zhou ritual system assigns colors and garment styles to rank and function. Silk, easily dyed and capable of supporting intricate designs, becomes the preferred material for ceremonial dress. Archaeological finds from Western Zhou tombs reveal garments adorned with fine embroidery, often in patterns representing animals, clouds, or geometric motifs. These designs reinforce the wearer's status and role within the complex Zhou social structure. Silk also enters diplomatic contexts. When the Zhou court interacts with neighboring peoples, some nomadic, some agrarian gifts of silk help establish alliances and reaffirm political relationships. To societies unfamiliar with sericulture, silk is both exotic and valuable. The ability to produce it in quantity provides the Zhou state with a resource that can be exchanged for horses, metals, and services essential to its stability and expansion. Technically, the period sees advancements as well. The looms used by Shang and Zhou weavers become more refined, allowing for wider textiles and more complex patterns. Spindle whorls found in tombs and settlements show standardized shapes and weights, indicating an increasing understanding of how to control thread thickness and tension. Silk dyeing also expands, with mineral and plant-based pigments producing a broader palette of colors. The presence of patterned textiles suggests experimentation with weave structures, laying the groundwork for more elaborate forms of brocade that will emerge in later periods. Silk's role in burial practices deepens under the Zhou. Tombs contain silk shrouds, belts, ribbons, and covers placed over bodies or used to wrap grave goods. These textiles often appear in association with bronze ritual vessels, chariots, and weapons, forming part of a symbolic assemblage representing continuity between the living and the ancestors. The careful placement of silk within these tombs shows that it is valued not merely for comfort, but for its association with dignity, purity, and propriety. As the Zhou dynasty progresses into the Eastern Zhou period, marked by the Spring and Autumn and Warring States eras, silk production becomes more widespread. Regional states establish their own workshops, each developing distinct styles. Some states, such as Siku and Wu, become known for bold patterns and vibrant dyes, while others favor more restrained designs. This regional diversity reflects both cultural differences and economic specialization. In some areas, mulberry cultivation expands significantly, with terraces built to support tree growth along river valleys and hillsides. Texts from the Warring States period reference silk as a standard unit of wealth. Scholars and officials receive silk as payment, and treaties between states often include amounts of silk specified alongside grain, land, or metal. Silk thus becomes integrated into the economic and political systems shaping early Chinese civilization. By the end of the Zhou period, silk has transitioned from a material rooted in Neolithic households to a central cultural and political resource. It now carries the weight of ritual practice, administrative power, regional identity, and economic value. The knowledge of sericulture spreads along with the ambitions of states, setting the stage for silk's eventual journey far beyond China's borders. When the Han dynasty rises in 206 BC, silk production enters one of the most structured and expansive phases in its history. The Han state, building on earlier traditions, begins organizing sericulture and textile manufacture on a scale unmatched in previous centuries. What began as a household craft in Neolithic villages and grew into an elite symbol in Shang and Zhou society now becomes a central component of imperial administration, economy, and diplomacy. In the early Han period, silk is integrated into the fiscal system as a form of tax. Households in suitable regions, particularly those with established mulberry, required to provide fixed amounts of raw silk, spun, thread, or woven cloth. These contributions are recorded in regional registers, demonstrating the state's efforts to standardize obligations across its vast territory. Archaeological discoveries of wooden and bamboo slips from frontier garrisons and administrative centers include references to these quotas, showing precisely how much silk each unit is expected to deliver. Statron workshops begin to appear in major cities. These are not small artisanal spaces, but large, organized institutions employing numerous workers, mostly women who spin, weave, and dye silk. under official supervision. Excavations in Chang'an and Luoyang reveal loom weights, spindle whorls, dyeing vats, and remnants of patterned textiles. Documents found in the ruins of government archives describe a hierarchy of officials overseeing procurement, labor management, quality inspection, and storage. The scale of these operations reflects the state's intent to guarantee a steady supply of silk for both domestic needs and diplomatic purposes. Silk also becomes critical in the military system. Frontier troops stationed along the northern borders receive silk garments and padded armor made from multiple layers of woven cloth. Silk's resilience, lightweight, and resistance to tearing make it suitable for protective gear. Records from garrisons in the Hexi Corridor and along the Great Wall include inventories of silk clothing distributed to soldiers. These inventories help historians reconstruct the standardized production lines feeding the imperial army. Diplomacy under the Han Dynasty relies heavily on silk envoys traveling to Xiongnu territories. Central Asian oasis states, and later 2 regions farther west carry bolts of silk as part of formal gift exchanges or tribute relations. The Han court uses silk to secure peace, to negotiate alliances, and to stabilize frontier relations. Zhang Qian's missions into Central Asia, recorded in the official histories, describe how silk functions as a universally recognized medium of wealth, valued across diverse cultures. With diplomacy comes trade. As the Han extend their influence westward, they establish control over key routes that will become the foundation of the Silk Road. Although these routes are not a single continuous path, they form a connected network linking China to Central Asia, the Iranian Plateau, and eventually the Eastern Mediterranean. The name Silk Road is modern, but the movement of silk along these routes is well documented in ancient sources. Han annals describe caravans carrying silk westward in exchange for horses, jade, gemstones, and metalwork. Administrative measures ensured that this trade remains consistent. Fortified postal stations known as Ting and Diyar, built at regular intervals along major routes. These stations supply food, shelter, horses, and storage for merchants and officials. Some stations contain workshops for repairing carts and equipment used in transport. The network allows not only silk, but also information, personnel, and official documents to circulate across great distances. The Han government also codifies textile production through legal statutes. The Hanshu Book of Han mentions regulations determining the quality of silk used in court ceremonies, military supplies, or diplomatic gifts. The state classifies silk into categories based on weave type, thread count, and dye. Royal workshops are responsible for producing the highest grades, while regional offices supply more utilitarian varieties. These classifications reflect a detailed bureaucratic approach where silk becomes an administratively measurable commodity. Technological innovation advances during this era. Draw looms capable of producing complex patterns appear in the archaeological record. These looms allow weavers to produce brocades with geometric and naturalistic designs, some featuring animals, clouds, and repeating motifs. The development of the draw loom requires coordinated labor. One operator manipulates the loom while an assistant controls pattern cords. This teamwork demonstrates a high level of organization within the textile workshops. Silk also enters the world of documentation. Surviving manuscripts from the Han period include strips of silk used as writing surfaces. Before paper becomes widespread, silk serves as a durable medium for legal documents, philosophical texts, and administrative orders. Pieces of silk with ink inscriptions have been found in tombs and excavated archives, providing evidence of its role in state communication. Silk remains a key component of social life as well. Elite clothing employs multiple layers of silk, embroidered with motifs representing rank and identity. The Book of Rites and other classical texts describe ceremonial garments worn during festivals, court sessions, and ancestral rituals. Patterns and colors are strictly regulated, reflecting social hierarchy and reinforcing the authority of the ruling elite. By the end of the Han Dynasty, silk stands at the center of a vast administrative, economic, and diplomatic system. The infrastructure created to manage its production, mulberry cultivation, labor divisions, quality inspection, transport networks, and official regulation forms the foundation on which later dynasties will build. Silk has moved far from its Neolithic origins, becoming a resource that supports not only households and workshops, but also armies, courts, and international relations. From this point forward, silk will continue traveling across deserts, mountains, and seas, reaching new civilizations that will value it as highly as the Han once did. As Han administrative systems expand across the northern frontier, silk begins to move steadily beyond the boundaries of the empire. This movement does not begin with a single event or a formal proclamation. It develops gradually through a combination of necessity, diplomacy, and geography. The early trade routes that will later be associated with the Silk Road emerge from the interaction of settled agricultural communities, oasis towns, and nomadic confederations spread across the vast interior of Asia. These early routes take shape along corridors, defined by natural topography. The Hexi Corridor, stretching between the Tibetan Plateau and the towering Kilian Mountains, becomes one of the most important. Archaeological surveys in this region, particularly around Dunhuang, Juquan, and Wu Revel, watchtowers, beacon platforms, and fortified settlements dating to the Han period. Wooden slips found within these structures record the distribution of grain, silk, fodder, and official documents. Their content shows a coordinated effort to maintain stable communication along this long, narrow passage. As caravans move through the Hexi Corridor, they encounter a network of oasis communities that rely on irrigation agriculture. These communities, located near present-day Turpan, Hamikucha, and Yarkand, serve as essential rest points. Excavated storage jars, remnants of textiles, and ledger fragments document commercial activity involving grain, livestock, hides, and silk. The presence of Chinese-style bronze, miares, and bolts of plain and patterned silk found in local burials indicates active exchange. These objects do not appear suddenly but accumulate across generations, reflecting ongoing contact rather than isolated missions. Silk's movement into Central Asia continues through interactions with nomadic groups such as these confederations control large expanses of the steppe and maintain mobility through mounted warfare and pastoralism. Diplomatic relations between the Han court and the Xiongnu involve exchanges of goods, including silk. Han officials record the quantities of silk sent as part of treaties, peace agreements, and marital alliances. For the Xiongnu, silk becomes both a trade item and a technological resource. Some fragments found in burial mounds along the steppe show signs of reuse in clothing, saddle decorations, and armor padding. From these nodes, silk begins moving farther west. Sogdian traders whose homeland corresponds to parts of modern Uzbekistan and Tajikistan emerge as influential intermediaries. Though their prominence increases in later centuries, early evidence shows that communities in Samarkand and Bukhara play a role in transmitting Chinese silk toward Persia. Excavations at ancient Sogdian sites uncover textiles with weaving techniques typical of China, alongside local imitations. This mixture suggests that silk not only arrives as a commodity, but also provides models for regional textile production. The physical infrastructure supporting these movements expands gradually. Relay stations positioned at regular intervals supply caravans with water, grain, and forage for animals. Some stations are simple structures with a few rooms and storage pits. Others are larger compounds with defensive walls, administrative offices, and reports inscribed on wooden slips describe tasks such as measuring provisions, recording arrivals and departures, and ensuring that transport animals receive the necessary care. Along these routes, silk becomes a standardized commodity. The bolts, typically narrow and tightly woven, are easier to transport and measure than many other goods. Han officials and merchants alike use bolts of silk as units of account, which simplifies trade with societies that rely on different currencies or barter systems. Silk has durability and high value relative to weight, make it ideal for long-distance transport across deserts and mountain passes. The caravan routes extend beyond the Central Asian oases to the Iranian plateau. Archaeological finds in Parthian territories include Chinese silk fragments, preserved in tombs and desert fortresses. The Parthian Empire controls key segments of the overland routes that connect Mesopotamia to Central Asia, and their role in facilitating trade becomes visible through the flow of goods. Parthian coins, metal vessels, and glassware found in Xinjiang sites demonstrate reciprocity. Silk travels westward, while other luxury goods move eastward. These interactions are not limited to luxury consumption. Silk enters regional economies in practical ways. In some areas, it is used as payment for caravan protection, local services, or supplies. In others, it circulates as a form of wealth within households, stored alongside tools, jewelry, and food reserves. Silk also becomes part of religious and funerary practices. In several excavated tombs from the Tarim Basin, silk is used to wrap bodies or line coffins. Its presence reflects both cultural exchange and the symbolic associations it carries from its origins in China. The movement of silk across these early trade routes is marked by continuity rather than sudden expansion. Exchanged each diplomatic mission. Each caravan supports the accumulation of connections that gradually span continents. By the end of the Western Han period, silk has reached regions far beyond the empire's direct influence. Yet its movement remains structured by the administrative systems created within China, which regulate its production, measure its quality, and oversee its distribution. These early routes lay the foundation for one of the most extensive networks of cultural and economic interaction in world history. In the centuries to come, the Silk Road will support not only commerce, but also the exchange of technologies, artistic styles, religions, and political ideas. But its origins lie here, in the steady movement of caravans through corridors shaped by mountains, rivers, and the decisions of the Han administration. As the Han dynasty refines its governance, silk becomes more than a commodity of exchange or a symbol of elite status. It enters the foundational structure of the state itself, functioning as a form of currency, a component of taxation, a source of military supply, and an instrument of political control. The administrative use of silk is documented across a wide range of sources: wooden slips from frontier posts, excavated ledgers from granaries, legal codes, and the detailed accounts preserved in official histories. Silk's role as currency arises naturally from its properties. It is durable, divisible, portable, and standardized. Bolts of silk vary in type and quality, but each category has a fixed value within the administrative system. A bolt of plain silk corresponds to a specific amount of grain, labor, or metal. A bolt of patterned brocade has a higher assigned value. These standards appear in Han legal statutes, where fines, salaries, and rewards are often calculated in units of silk rather than coinage. In regions where a copper currency is scarce or unsuitable for long-distance transport, silk becomes the primary medium of exchange. Wooden accounting slips from garrisons along the Gansu corridor list silk payments, issued to soldiers as part of their rations and equipment allowances. In remote agricultural zones, silk substitutes for tax payments, allowing households to meet state obligations even when harvests fluctuate. This flexibility strengthens the administrative system by reducing dependence on coinage, which can be difficult to distribute evenly across a vast empire. Silk also plays a central role in compensation structures. Officials at various ranks receive part of their remuneration in silk. The amounts differ according to position, but the principle remains the same. Silk provides a stable and predictable form of income. Its use in salaries allows the government to reward service, maintain loyalty, and ensure that administrators have the means to perform their duties. Documents from the Zhanggeshan cache, which include early Han legal texts, specify the precise quantities of silk allocated for specific offices. Beyond salaries, silk supports the empire's military infrastructure. Soldiers stationed along the northern frontier receive silk clothing suited to harsh climates. Padded silk jackets provide insulation in winter and some measure of protection against arrows. Silk thread, remarkably strong, is used to bind components of armor and equipment. Military records from Dunhuang list inventories of silk garments issued before campaigns or during seasonal rotations. The consistent presence of silk in these ledgers demonstrates its integration into logistical planning. Silk further appears in the distribution of rewards. Exceptional service, whether in warfare, administration, or agriculture, may be recognized through gifts of silk. These gifts formalize achievements in measurable terms and reinforce the hierarchical order of the state. The Han system relies on clear channels of merit recognition, and silk serves as a tangible marker of rank, distinction, and imperial favor. The state's reliance on silk stimulates large-scale production. To meet administrative needs, the government organizes specialized sericulture zones. Texts such as the Discourses on Salt and Iron, compiled during the Western Han, describe state policies that encourage mulberry cultivation among rural households. Farmers in designated regions receive instructions on planting density, pruning methods, and feeding schedules for silkworms, while local households perform much of the labor. Oversight belongs to regional officials who monitor yields, maintain records, and ensure that quotas reach government storerooms. These storerooms, granary-like facilities, hold bolts of silk sorted by type, color, and intended use. Labels written on bamboo or wooden tags accompany each bundle, specifying origin, weave, and grade. Storage procedures follow strict rules. Silk must be protected from moisture, pests, and temperature fluctuations. Excavated documents from frontier warehouses describe inspection routines and the penalties for mishandling state resources. The thoroughness of these administrative procedures reveals how fully silk has entered the logistical framework of the empire. Diplomatically, silk functions as an indispensable tool. When the Han court sends envoys to Xiongnu chieftains or Central Asian rulers, silk appears among the gifts. These exchanges are not symbolic gestures alone. They serve concrete political purposes, secure in peace, encouraging trade cooperation, and reinforcing hierarchical relationships. Official histories record the exact quantities of silk distributed in these missions. The scale of these allocations illustrates silk's importance as a resource for foreign policy. Silk's use in jurisprudence also appears in legal codes. Infractions may be punished with fines measured not in coin but in silk. A person who damages government property, fails to meet tax quotas, or breaches agricultural regulations may owe a specific number of bolts. This reinforces silk's function as a universal measure, applicable across economic and social contexts. In household economies, silk offers stability. Families may store silk as a form of savings, using it to pay taxes or settle obligations. Archaeological finds in rural burials sometimes include bolts of silk or silk cocoons, suggesting that families treat silk as both a useful material and a form of wealth. This supports local communities by providing a buffer against economic uncertainty, while also maintaining the flow of silk into the state system. By the height of the Han Dynasty, silk has fully integrated into the mechanisms of governance. It circulates through administrative channels with the same regularity as grain or metal, appearing in every facet of state operations from taxation and storage to diplomacy and military supply. This administrative integration ensures that silk remains central to Chinese governance long after the Han collapse, shaping its role in subsequent dynasties and its value across international trade networks. As the Han Dynasty consolidates its influence in Central Asia, silk begins to appear far beyond the boundaries of China. The movement is gradual, shaped by a chain of intermediaries operating across thousands of kilometers. Each region receives silk, integrates it into its own economy, and passes it onward. By the first centuries BCE and CE, silk reaches the Mediterranean world, becoming one of the most prized commodities in Rome, Parthia, and the broader Eastern Mediterranean. The earliest documented references to Chinese silk in the Mediterranean come from classical authors. Roman writers, such as Pliny the Elder, Strabo, and Seneca, describe silk as a product originating in distant eastern lands. Pliny, writing in the 1st century CE, notes that silk is obtained through a process of unraveling threads from cocoons, though his description suggests incomplete understanding. Despite gaps in knowledge, classical texts confirm that silk is recognized as a luxury material associated with eastern regions, beyond Parthia. Archaeological evidence complements these written accounts. Silk fragments discovered in Palmyra, Diriyah, and Egyptian desert sites show weaving techniques characteristic of Chinese production. Some fragments use the plain weave typical of Han textiles. Others feature patterned brocades. These finds appear in burial shrouds, clothing remnants, and household textiles, demonstrating silk's integration into local craft traditions. Laboratory analysis of the fibers confirms their origin through comparison with known Chinese silks. The Parthian Empire plays a central role in the movement of silk westward, controlling key segments of the overland routes, between Central Asia and Mesopotamia. Parthian merchants act as intermediaries. Classical sources describe the Parthians as skilled traders who deliberately obscure the origin of silk to protect their commercial advantage. They receive silk from Sogdian and Central Asian merchants and transport it toward Mesopotamia, where it enters markets such as Seleucia, Ctesiphon, and Babylon. From these urban centers, silk moves into the networks of the eastern Mediterranean. Palmyra, an oasis city situated along important trade corridors, emerges as a keynote. Palmyran merchants maintained commercial connections with both Parthian and Roman territories. Inscriptions and documents found in Palmyra record the taxes and tariffs applied to caravans carrying silk and other high-value goods. These records illustrate the regulated movement of luxury textiles through the region. Egypt also becomes an important destination. The arid climate of the eastern desert preserves organic materials exceptionally well, allowing silk fragments to survive for millennia. Excavations at Roman period sites such as Mons, Clodianus, and Kelis reveal Chinese silk used in garments, headbands, and decorative elements. Textile analysis shows a mixture of imported silk and locally woven fabrics, suggesting that silk is sometimes reworked by Egyptian artisans. This blending of techniques highlights the cultural adaptation of silk within Mediterranean textile traditions. In Rome, silk becomes a material associated with wealth, ceremony, and political status. Written sources document intense demand among the elite. Roman senators, equestrians, and wealthy citizens wore garments incorporating silk threads or entire panels of silk fabric. However, silk's visibility in elite garments triggers debates within Roman society. Some commentators criticize silk as a symbol of luxury and moral decline, while others note its economic implications. Pliny remarks that Rome spends vast sums acquiring silk from the East, highlighting concerns about trade imbalance. Roman authorities attempt at times to regulate silk consumption. Sumptuary laws restrict who may wear certain types of garments. For example, men are discouraged from wearing entirely sheer silk clothing, which some writers consider inappropriate. These regulations reflect not only moral concerns, but also the recognition that silk is expensive and politically significant. Despite these laws, silk's popularity continues, supported by the tastes of the imperial court and wealthy citizens. Trade patterns gradually diversify. While overland routes remain important, maritime routes begin to play a larger role. Roman merchants operating from ports in the Red Sea, such as Berenike and Meos, along the coasts of Arabia and East Africa toward the Indian subcontinent. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a Roman-era navigation manual, describes trade with Indian ports and mentions textiles among the goods exchanged. Although it does not explicitly name Chinese silk, the patterns of trade outlined in the text allow silk to move from India to Roman territories through maritime intermediaries. This diffusion of silk is supported by the adaptability of the material. Silk's light, weight, and high value make it suitable for long-distance transport, whether over desert tracks or across seas. Merchants store silk in compact bundles, often wrapped in protective layers to shield it from damage. Its durability allows it to survive months of travel through varying climates. Silk's integration into Mediterranean life extends beyond elite clothing. It appears in religious contexts, where it is used for burial garments, votive offerings, and ceremonial decorations. In some cases, silk serves as a marker of identity or status in multicultural communities. Jewish, Christian, and Greco-Roman groups incorporate silk differently, reflecting distinct traditions, while sharing access to the same material. By the 2nd century CE, silk has become a recognized component of the Roman world. Its presence in texts, tombs, and administrative records demonstrates a stable pattern of circulation. This pattern persists even as political landscapes change. The steady demand for silk ensures that merchants from Central Asia, Persia, India, and the Eastern Mediterranean maintain contact with one another, creating a network of exchange that will endure long after the Han Dynasty declines. Silk's journey to the Mediterranean highlights the complex interplay of geography, commerce, and administration. It shows how a material originating in Neolithic China becomes a valued resource across multiple civilizations. and it marks the beginning of a transcontinental network that will shape the economies and cultures of Eurasia for centuries. As silk becomes firmly established in the Mediterranean world, it enters the administrative, economic, and moral debates of the Roman Empire. The arrival of silk in Rome is not merely a matter of fashion. It becomes a question of governance, public spending, trade balance, and social order. Roman writers, senators, and imperial authorities leave a detailed record of how silk is perceived, regulated, and debated within one of the most influential states of antiquity. The earliest Roman reactions to silk appear in the late Republic and early Empire. At first, silk is associated with the extraordinary wealth of Eastern rulers. Accounts in the works of Horace and Virgil describe silk as a luxury material worn by foreign elites. It enters Rome through Parthian intermediaries, whose caravans bring textiles to Syrian and Mesopotamian markets that supply Roman merchants. The rarity and cost of silk make it an immediate status symbol among the Roman elite. As consumption increases, concerns arise. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century CE, records detailed observations about silk in his natural history. He remarks on the high cost of acquiring silk from distant eastern regions and criticizes its use in garments that appear semi-transparent, a feature produced by certain weaving techniques. Pliny's comments reflect broader anxieties in Roman society about luxury goods and the erosion of traditional values. Seneca, another writer of the period, expresses similar concerns. He criticizes garments made of pure silk as signs of his writings connect the popularity of silk with moral decline, suggesting that such luxuries distract from civic duty and discipline. These critiques appear frequently in Roman literature, indicating that silk is part of a broader conversation about wealth, moderation, and social hierarchy. In response to these concerns, Roman authorities introduce regulations, sumptuary laws, rules governing clothing, feasts, and displays of wealth are used intermittently throughout Roman history to control luxury consumption. While these laws do not always mention silk explicitly, they apply to garments incorporating expensive or foreign materials. For example, during the reign of Tiberius, the Senate debates restrictions on silk garments for men, arguing that the material is unsuitable for male attire and contributes to excessive spending. These debates highlight a central tension. Silk is valued for its beauty and prestige, yet feared for its economic implications. Roman writers estimate that large quantities of gold leave the empire each year in exchange for silk and other Eastern luxury goods. Pliny claims that Rome sends millions of sesterces eastward annually. Although modern historians question the numerical accuracy, the concern is well documented. The idea that silk drains wealth from the imperial treasury becomes a recurring theme. Administrative measures reflect these anxieties. Customs offices in Syrian and Egyptian ports record taxes levied on silk imports. Papyrus documents from Roman Egypt list tariffs applied to textiles, including those believed to be silk. These tariffs aim to regulate trade, generate revenue, and moderate consumption. They also provide evidence of the organized commercial networks that bring silk to Roman territory. Silk's role within social classes becomes increasingly defined. The highest-ranking individual senators, equestrians, wealthy merchants, and members of the imperial household wear garments combining silk with wool or linen. Full silk garments, though controversial, appear in court ceremonies and elite gatherings. The toga, a traditional symbol of Roman identity, remains primarily wool, but supplementary garments incorporate silk patterns or borders. The clavi, vertical stripes worn by senators and equestrians, sometimes include silk threads, demonstrating how silk becomes integrated into official attire. By the 2nd century CE, silk is no longer a rarity. It enters broader urban markets in cities such as Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch. Merchants specializing in luxury textiles maintain workshops where silk garments are tailored, embroidered, and sometimes recycled. Archaeological evidence from urban refuse heaps shows scraps of silk used to decorate household items or reinforce garments, indicating that silk penetrates multiple layers of society through reuse and trade. Despite its growing availability, the debate over silk's origins continues. Roman scholars lack precise knowledge about silk. Some believe silk grows on trees, an interpretation that likely arises from descriptions of silk coming from lands beyond Roman contact. Others speculate that it is woven from plant fibers. Pliny's account of unraveling cocoons comes closest to describing actual methods, though he attributes the process to distant Eastern peoples. This incomplete understanding reflects the geographical and political separation between Rome and the regions where silk is produced. Diplomatically, silk also plays a role. Roman-Parthian relations involve exchanges of goods that include silk. The Parthians benefit from acting as intermediaries, controlling trade routes and maintaining commercial leverage. Rome, unable to access China directly through stable overland routes, relies on Parthian and Arab merchants. This dependency becomes one of the underlying motives for Roman interest in alternate trade routes to India and the Eastern Oceans. The economic influence of silk extends into manufacturing. Roman artisans experiment with combining silk with other fibers, producing hybrid textiles that appear in surviving samples from Egyptian sites. These fabrics demonstrate Roman efforts to adapt silk to local tastes and production methods. Some weave structured in the Mediterranean blend techniques from the Near East with indigenous patterns, highlighting the cultural exchange facilitated by silk trade. By the late Roman Empire, silk has become fully entrenched within society. It appears in imperial iconography, court ceremonies, military decorations, and religious contexts. Yet the tension between admiration and concern persists throughout Roman history. Silk remains both a luxury and a symbol of Rome's connection to distant economies, illustrating how a single material can influence the cultural and administrative fabric of one of the world's greatest empires. As silk becomes increasingly valued across Asia and the Mediterranean world, sericulture itself begins to spread beyond the borders of China. This process unfolds gradually and through multiple channels: migration, diplomacy, imitation, and deliberate transfer of knowledge. By the first millennium CE, silk production appears in Korea, Japan, India, and parts of Southeast Asia. Each region adapts sericulture to local conditions, creating distinct techniques, styles, and administrative structures. The earliest regions to develop sericulture outside China are Korea and Japan. Archaeological evidence from the Korean peninsula suggests silk production as early as the Three Kingdoms period. Textile fragments found in tombs belonging to the Silla and Goguryeo kingdoms show weaving techniques similar to those used in Han China. The presence of these textiles indicates that Korean artisans adopt Chinese weaving methods and likely receive instruction from Chinese migrants, traders, or captives. Written sources, including entries in the Samgusu, mention diplomatic exchanges in which mulberry cuttings, silkworm, eggs, and textile tools are transferred between courts. State involvement becomes crucial in establishing stable sericulture. In the Silla kingdom, royal workshops appear in urban centers, producing silk garments used in ceremonies and diplomatic missions. Silla's unification of the peninsula in the 7th century reinforces the development of silk as part of the broader administrative and cultural system. The production remains smaller in scale compared to China, but demonstrates a structured effort to incorporate silk into political and social life. Japan adopts sericulture through multiple routes, including migration from the Korean peninsula and diplomatic exchanges with China. The earliest Japanese silk fragments, dated to the Kofun period, show similarities to textile patterns from the Eastern Han and Sixth Dynasties periods. Surviving examples of early Japanese silk, preserved in the Shoswin Repository in Nara, include fabrics woven with complex patterns and dyed in vivid colors. These textiles provide direct evidence of the transmission of craftsmanship. Japanese state documents from the Nara and Heian periods describe official policies supporting government offices oversee mulberry cultivation, regulate labor, and manage production for court use. Silk becomes integral to the ceremonial clothing worn by aristocrats, priests, and court officials. The Taihu Code, an early administrative code, assigns specific garments often made of silk to ranks within the court hierarchy. These garments help define political identity and regulate the appearance of officials during rituals and state functions. India develops its own traditions of silk production, distinct from East Asian techniques. Evidence of wild silk use, particularly tussar, silk from forest-dwelling species, appears in ancient Indian texts and archaeological finds. These silks differ from Chinese mulberry silk in texture and color, but both types become part of regional textile traditions. By the early centuries CE, Indian artisans produced fine silk garments used in religious ceremonies and trade. The Arthashastra, an early treatise on statecraft, references silk production and notes government oversight of textile workshops. Chinese mulberry silk arrives in India through trade routes connecting Central Asia with the Indian subcontinent. Cities such as Taxila and Mathura serve as important exchange points. Silk fragments discovered in burial sites and urban excavations attest to the blending of Chinese and Indian textile traditions. Some Indian weavers begin incorporating Chinese filament silk into their fabrics, creating hybrid textiles that combine local patterns with imported materials. Southeast Asia also engages in silk production. Regions in present-day Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand develop sericulture independently, or with influence from Chinese and Indian traditions. In Vietnam, silk production appears during the Hong-Essen culture, and later, Chinese dynasties introduce additional techniques during periods of direct rule. Historical records from the Tams dynasty mention silk tribute from Annam, indicating organized production in the region. While sericulture spreads, China maintains its role as the primary center of technological innovation. Chinese weavers develop increasingly sophisticated looms, dyeing methods, and weaving patterns. Draw looms capable of producing large and intricate brocades allow artisans to create textiles with complex motifs. These innovations influence neighboring regions, but local adaptations in Korea, Japan, India, and Southeast Asia ensure that each develops a distinctive silk culture. The spread of sericulture affects trade networks. As new regions begin producing silk, they contribute additional varieties to the markets of Central Asia, India, and the Middle East. These varieties differ in texture, color, and design. Some regions specialize in particular types of silk. Korea in lightweight fabrics, Japan in refined, patterned weaves, and India in richly colored textiles. This diversity enhances the complexity of silk trade and expands the range of goods available to merchants. State policies play a significant role in shaping sericulture outside China. Korean and Japanese courts regulate production to ensure a stable supply for official use. Indian polities integrate silk into regional economies and religious traditions. Southeast Asian rulers adopt silk as part of court attire, diplomatic gifts, and tribute payments. These administrative structures reflect the growing importance of silk as a political and economic resource across the broader region. By the early medieval period, sericulture is firmly established across East and South Asia. China no longer holds exclusive control of silk production, though it remains the largest and most technologically advanced producer. The spread of silk-making techniques demonstrates how a material originating in a single region can be transmitted across cultures through a combination of trade, diplomacy, and statecraft. Silk's expansion beyond China sets the stage for further developments in the Byzantine and Islamic worlds, where new centers of production will emerge and shape the global history of textiles for centuries to come. When the Eastern Roman Empire, later known as Byzantium, emerges as a major power in the late antique world, silk enters a new phase of administration and production. For the first time outside China, a state establishes its own centralized, regulated, and large-scale silk industry. Byzantium transforms silk from a luxury import into a controlled imperial resource, woven directly into its political, ceremonial, and economic structures. Before Byzantium develops its own sericulture, the empire relies on imported silk from Persia and, indirectly, from China. Administrative records from late Roman and early Byzantine periods mention tariffs, trade missions, and diplomatic exchanges involving silk. The demand remains high, especially within the imperial court, where silk becomes essential for clothing, banners, ceremonial clothes, and ecclesiastical vestments. This dependence on foreign silk places Byzantium in a vulnerable position. The Sasanian Empire, Byzantium's principled eastern rival, controls key trade routes through Iran and Central Asia. When diplomatic relations deteriorate, silk supplies become unstable. Imperial correspondence preserved in Greek and Syriac sources reports attempts to secure new trade routes, including maritime contacts with South Asia via the Red Sea. These efforts reduce but do not eliminate reliance on Persian intermediaries. According to Byzantine chroniclers, a significant turning point occurs in the 6th century under Emperor Justinian. The first two monks, traveling through Central Asia, reportedly obtain silkworm eggs and transport them back to Byzantium, concealed in bamboo containers. While the details of this account cannot be verified in full, archaeological and documentary evidence confirm that sericulture is introduced into the Byzantine Empire around this time. This development enables Byzantium to establish its own silk industry, independent of foreign supplies. With the introduction of sericulture, the Byzantine state imposes strict controls. Silk production becomes a royal monopoly, centered in workshops known as gina. These workshops operate in major cities such as Constantinople, Thebes, and Corinth. Administrative manuals, including the Book of the Prefect, outline regulations governing the silk industry. Officials oversee procurement of raw silk, supervise weaving processes, enforce quality standards, and regulate pricing. Silk production is divided into distinct stages. Workers responsible for cultivating mulberry trees, rearing silkworms, spinning thread, dyeing, and weaving operate within a structured hierarchy. Inspections occur at each stage to prevent fraud and ensure uniformity. Penalties for unauthorized production or sale of silk include fines and, in some cases, severe criminal punishment. These measures protect the imperial monopoly and guarantee that silk remains a symbol of state authority. Byzantine silk workshops create textiles distinguished by their intricate patterns, rich colors, and use of gold thread. Surviving fragments from burial sites, churches, and museum collections reveal designs featuring animals, geometric motifs, and imperial insignia. These textiles demonstrate advanced weaving techniques, especially the use of draw looms to produce complex, figural patterns. Many patterns reflect Christian iconography, illustrating the integration of silk into religious life. Silk garments play a central role in imperial ceremony. The emperor wears silk robes embroidered with gold thread during coronations, processions, and diplomatic audiences. These garments symbolize divine authority and political legitimacy. Specific colors, especially purple, carry significant meaning. The dye used for imperial purple, derived from the murex shell, becomes closely associated with the ruling dynasty. Laws restrict the manufacture and use of purple silk to the imperial household, reinforcing the connection between textile production and political hierarchy. Diplomatically, Byzantine silk becomes a powerful tool. Emperors send silk robes, banners, and cloths as gifts to foreign rulers. These textiles serve as tangible representations of imperial prestige. Embassies from the Frankish kingdoms, Islamic caliphates, and Central Asian states receive silk as part of formal exchanges. Documents describing these missions list quantities and types of textiles presented, highlighting the administrative precision behind such diplomatic gestures. Silk also becomes integrated into Byzantine economic life. The state's control over silk ensures steady revenue through taxation and sales. Silk merchants known as metaxiprata operata under strict regulation, permitted to sell only textiles produced in official workshops. Price controls prevent inflation and ensure that silk remains accessible to the administrative and ecclesiastical institutions that require it. Legal codes reference penalties for smuggling or adulterating silk, demonstrating the importance of maintaining quality and protecting the monopoly. Christian institutions contribute to the preservation and dissemination of Byzantine silk. Churches use silk for altar cloths, vestments, and reliquary coverings. Many textiles survive because they are stored in dry, protected environments or placed in tombs. These preserved fragments provide detailed evidence of weave structures, iconography, and dyeing techniques, making it possible to reconstruct aspects of Byzantine textile technology. The influence of Byzantine silk extends far beyond the empire's borders. As silk circulates through diplomatic and commercial networks, it inspires new textile traditions in regions such as Italy, Spain, and the Islamic world. Some textiles produced in Byzantium appear in burial contexts across Europe and the Middle East. These finds illustrate how Byzantine craftsmanship becomes widely recognized and imitated. By the Middle Byzantine period, silk manufacture is firmly institutionalized, The imperial workshops operate as both economic centers and symbols of state power. Their output supports the political, religious, and ceremonial needs of Byzantium, while also contributing to the empire's diplomatic relationships. The system remained stable for centuries, adapting to political changes while preserving core administrative practices. The development of silk production in Byzantium marks a significant chapter in the global history of textiles. For the first time since its origins in China, an un-Chinese state establishes a comprehensive sericulture and weaving industry under formal government control. This development reshapes regional economies and opens new pathways for cultural exchange. With the rise of the Islamic caliphates in the 7th century, silk production and trade enter another significant stage of development. The Umayyad and Abbasid periods create a vast political framework, stretching from the Iberian Peninsula to Central Asia, linking regions with long textile traditions and incorporating new centers of Within this territory, silk becomes a central commodity used at courts, integrated into religious and administrative institutions, and produced in large quantities by skilled urban workshops. The expansion of Islam unites regions that already engage in textile manufacturing. Persia, Central Asia, Egypt, and parts of the Eastern Mediterranean possess established weaving traditions and access to raw materials, including silk. When these regions come under the authority of the caliphates, their textile industries become part of a broader economic system. Arabic sources from the 8th and 9th centuries describe the organization of production, the quality of fabrics, and the movement of goods across the empire. Cities such as Nishapur, Samarkand, and Balkh play central roles. These cities lie along major trade routes connecting China to the Middle East, and archaeological evidence from their urban layers reveals the presence of silk workshops, dyeing facilities, and equipment for spinning and weaving. Finds include spindle whorls, loom weights, dye vats, and fragments of patent silk. The artifacts show how these cities support both local production and the distribution of imported silk. Under the Abbasid Caliphate, with its capital in Baghdad, silk production becomes highly organized. Baghdad's position on the Tigris River, surrounded by fertile agricultural zones and connected to long-distance trade routes, allows it to serve as a hub for textile manufacture. Historical accounts describe whole districts dedicated to weaving and dyeing. Skilled artisans from Persia, Central Asia, and Syria contribute techniques refined over centuries, creating a diverse and vibrant textile environment. Silk garments worn at the Abbasid court reflect this diversity. Court descriptions preserved in chronicles mention robes woven with gold thread, patterned with geometric or vegetal designs, and dyed in vivid colors. The caliphal wardrobe includes garments for different ceremonies and seasons, each produced to precise specifications. These textiles not only serve as clothing but also symbolize the wealth, authority, and administrative reach of the court. Dyeing technology also advances significantly. The caliphates maintain access to a broad array of dyes, including indigo from India, madar from the Levant, and kermes from the Mediterranean. The combination of high-quality dyes and skilled weaving creates textiles with deep, stable colors. Silk workshops in cities such as Damascus, Aleppo, and Tyre produce fabrics known for their clarity of color and complexity of pattern. Silk appears in administrative contexts as well. Documents preserved in the Cairo Geniza include records of textile transactions, lists of silk garments, and correspondence related to the purchase and distribution of silk. These documents, written in Hebrew, Judeo-Arabic, and Arabic, illustrate how silk circulates through commercial networks and how merchants document its movement. Silk functions as a form of payment, a traded commodity, and a taxable asset. In some regions, the state directly oversees textile production, known as tiras factories. These official workshops produce textiles bearing inscriptions with the names of rulers or administrators. These inscriptions, typically woven or embroidered along the edges of garments, serve as both decorative elements and markers of political authority. Tiras textiles appear in diplomatic exchanges, court ceremonies, and religious contexts. Their production reflects the close relationship between textile manufacture and governance in the Islamic world. The Caliphate's geographic position facilitates the movement of silk both eastward and westward. Silk arrives from China via overland routes through Central Asia and via maritime routes across the Indian Ocean. Arab and Persian merchants participate actively in trade, transporting silk from Southeast Asia, India, and China to markets in the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. Written sources such as the works of Al-Masudi, Ali-Darisi, and Ibn Khordadbeh describe trade routes, caravan logistics, and customs regulations, providing detailed insight into the movement of silk across vast distances. The Islamic Golden Age sees an explosion of scientific and technical knowledge. Texts, written in Arabic, describe dyeing techniques, loom technologies, and fiber preparation. The Book of Gifts and Rarities, a compilation of courtly descriptions, mentions silk among the luxury items collected and distributed by rulers. These descriptions helped historians reconstruct the aesthetic and cultural significance of silk during this period. Silk production spreads beyond major cities into regional centers. In Egypt, Fustat becomes a prominent center of weaving. Excavations reveal fragments of silk textiles preserved in dry desert conditions, including patterned fabrics that show both local and imported influences. In Al-Andalus, the region of Islamic Spain, cities such as Cordoba, Almeria, and Granada developed their own textile traditions. These workshops produce silks, known for their distinctive patterns, and later become integral to European textile culture. Silk is also used in religious settings. Quranic manuscripts may be wrapped in silk covers, and silk textiles appear in mosques. As decorative elements, some sects debate the permissibility of silk garments, especially for men, leading to variations in usage across regions. These discussions reflect the broader integration of silk into social, economic, and religious life. By the 10th century, the Islamic world contained several of the most important silk-producing cities outside China and Byzantium. Each region contributes unique styles, techniques, and designs, creating a rich textile landscape. The caliphate's administrative structures support this production through taxation, regulation, and trade coordination. As a result, silk becomes a material that moves fluidly across continents, shaped by the combined influences of Chinese, Byzantine workshops, and the diverse textile traditions of the Islamic world. These developments prepare the way for silk's transformation during the medieval period in Europe, where new guilds, merchant associations, and city-states will adopt and adapt silk production on their own terms. As silk production flourishes in Byzantium and across the Islamic world, medieval Europe gradually develops its own centers of weaving, dyeing, and trade. While Europe does not yet produce silk on the scale of China or the Middle East, the expansion of commercial networks and the emergence of powerful urban guilds begin transforming silk into an important economic and administrative resource in the Western Mediterranean. The earliest medieval European silks arrive as imports. During the early Middle Ages, silk textiles travel through diplomatic channels, religious institutions, and aristocratic households. Many of the best preserved examples appear in ecclesiastical contexts. Churches and monasteries store silk relic wrappers, vestments, and altar cloths brought from Byzantium or the Islamic world. The dry conditions of certain regions allow these textiles to survive intact, providing detailed evidence of early medieval silk's patterns and weave structures. These imported silks serve several functions. They are used to wrap relics, line shrines, and adorn liturgical objects. They become symbols of prestige within monasteries and cathedrals, marking the wealth and influence of religious institutions. Inventories kept by monastic scribes list silk garments alongside precious metals, carved ivory, and illuminated manuscripts, reflecting their high value. By the 11th century, silk weaving begins to take root in parts of Italy. Cities such as Lucca, Venice, and Palermo emerge as early centers of production. The development of these industries occurs through a combination of factors: proximity to Mediterranean trade routes, access to skilled artisans, and the presence of merchants familiar with Byzantine and Islamic weaving technologies. Lucca becomes particularly important. Historical records indicate that by the 12th century, Lucca hosts numerous workshops capable of producing patterned silks, brocades, and damask. The city's weaving techniques draw influence from both Byzantium and the Islamic world, integrating motifs such as stylized animals, geometric patterns, and vegetal designs. Lucca's workshops produce textiles for both domestic consumption and export, supplying courts and ecclesiastical institutions across Europe. The organization of textile production in medieval Europe differs from the centralized state-run workshops of Byzantium. Instead, production is controlled by guilds, formal associations of artisans who regulate training, quality, and commercial practices. Guild records from cities such as Genoa, Bologna, and Florence outline rules governing loom use, apprenticeship terms, and the measurement of textiles. These guilds ensure consistent standards across the industry and protect local artisans from competition. Guild hierarchies include apprentices, journeymen, and masters. Apprentices train for several years under the supervision of established weavers. Journeymen produce textiles for their guilds, but cannot open workshops independently. Masters supervise production, maintain equipment, and participate in guild governance. This structure preserves technical knowledge and ensures that weaving skills pass through controlled channels. Trade networks expand alongside guilds. Italian merchants operating in Venice, Genoa, and Pisa traveled extensively through the Mediterranean, bringing raw materials, dyes, and technical innovations back to Europe. Venetian merchants maintain regular contact with Byzantine and Islamic markets, acquiring silk thread, semi-finished textiles, and weaving equipment. These materials feed into Italian workshops, enabling them to produce increasingly sophisticated fabrics. As production grows, European cities develop regulations similar to those found in earlier systems. Municipal statutes control dyeing practices, forbid the use of substandard materials, and establish fixed prices for certain textiles. Inspections ensure compliance. Violations result in fines or confiscation, demonstrating the importance of maintaining quality in an industry associated with high-value goods. By the late medieval period, silk weaving spreads beyond Italy. Southern France, particularly the region around Lyon, becomes a major center of production. French guilds adopt Italian techniques and establish their own standards. Silk from Lyon becomes known for its elaborate patterns and consistent quality. Spain, influenced by both Islamic and European traditions, also produces silk in cities such as Valencia, Granada, and Toledo. These regions blend local motifs with imported techniques, creating distinctive styles. Religious institutions continue to play a major role in preserving and distributing silk. Cathedrals commission vestments with detailed embroidery, often using gold thread combined with silk. Royal courts purchase large quantities of silk for ceremonial garments, banners, and furnishings. European aristocrats invest in silk as a display of authority, commissioning garments with extensive patterning and complex brocade structures. Silk also enters administrative systems. Some European states accept silk as payment for certain taxes or fees, especially in regions where weaving becomes a major industry. Municipal treasuries hold silk among their valuable assets, and city councils regulate its trade to ensure economic stability. The Crusades contribute to the spread of silk knowledge. As European forces travel through Byzantium and the Islamic world, they encounter advanced silk technologies. Some artisans move westward, either voluntarily or through forced relocation, bringing specialized skills. While the overall impact of the Crusades on silk production is complex, they facilitate cultural exchange and contribute to the expansion of European textile industries. By the 15th century, European silk production achieves a new level of sophistication. Italian and Spanish workshops produce brocades and velvets of high technical quality. These textiles appear in portraits, inventories, and surviving garments across the continent. Raw silk, still imported from the Middle East and Asia, becomes essential to maintaining production levels. The rise of European silk guilds marks a significant shift in the history of the textile. For the first time in the Western Mediterranean, a structured network of artisans, merchants, and municipal authorities sustains silk production independently of imperial control. This network lays the foundation for the powerful textile economies of Renaissance Italy and early modern France, both of which will influence global trade for centuries to come. When the Mongol Empire emerges in the 13th century, it reshapes the geography of Eurasian trade. The political consolidation achieved by Mongol rule creates a zone of relative stability stretching from the Yellow Sea to the Black Sea. This stability allows the movement of goods, including silk, to reach levels of regularity and scale not seen since the height of the Han Dynasty. Under Mongol administration, caravan routes become safer, postal stations function more efficiently, and long-distance merchants receive unprecedented support. These conditions integrate silk more directly than ever into a transcontinental system of exchange. The Mongols inherit territories with long-established silk traditions. Northern China, captured in stages during the campaigns against the Jin dynasty, contains extensive sericulture districts and weaving establishments. When the Mongols later conquer the southern Song, they gain control over the most advanced silk centers in the world, including Hangzhou, Suzhou, and other cities in the Yangtze River Delta. Administrative documents produced after these conquests record inventories of looms, dyes, and skilled artisans who continue their work under new rulers. Under the Yuan dynasty in China, silk production remains highly structured. The Mongols reassigned certain workshops to produce goods for the court and the military. Silk garments, banners, and brocades appear in tax lists and court expenditures. UN legal codes describe obligations imposed on silk-producing households and outline the responsibilities of overseers managing imperial workshops. Silk becomes a component of state logistics, used in garments for officials, rewards for service, and supplies for religious institutions. In addition to maintaining Chinese production, the Mongols facilitate silk trade on a continental scale. Their most important contribution is the reorganization of the relay system known as the Yam. This network of postal stations provides food, shelter, fresh horses, storage facilities, and administrative support along major routes. The AME ensures that caravans can move safely across territories that once required negotiation with multiple competing powers. Official documents, including letters and travel permits, record the issuance of pseudo-authoritative tablets that grant merchants access to the relay system. These measures significantly reduce the risks associated with long-distance trade. Merchants transporting silk, spices, metalwork, or other goods benefit from decreased banditry and improved infrastructure. Caravan remains found in Central Asian sites show standardized loads of silk bolts stacked and wrapped according to common practices. The consistency of these loads indicates regular, predictable transport. The increased security enables the rise of merchant families who operate across multiple regions. Sogdian, Uyghur, Persian, Armenian, and Chinese merchants travel along corridors that had previously been fragmented by political boundaries. Archival documents from Central Asia, including those discovered at Turfan and Dunhuang, contain letters, contracts, and ledgers detailing silk transactions. These records show silk being exchanged for horses, metals, grains, and luxury items at prices fixed by local markets. Silk's movement under Mongol rule is not limited to trade. It also functions within diplomacy. The Mongols use silk garments as part of diplomatic gifts to allied rulers, foreign envoys, and administrators. Descriptions in Persian and Chinese chronicles note that silk robes are given to high-ranking officials. As marks of status, the circulation of these garments strengthens networks of loyalty and demonstrates the breadth of Mongol control over textile-producing regions. Religious institutions participate in the expanded silk economy. Buddhist monasteries along Central Asian routes use silk for banners, altar cloths, and the wrapping of sacred texts. Several manuscripts found in cave temples near Dunhuang include silk bindings, or silk covers. These objects illustrate the use of silk not only as a commodity, but also as a material embedded in ritual practices and artistic expression. In Western Eurasia, silk appears more frequently in markets and elite households during the Mongol era. Italian merchant communities in cities such as Tabriz Sarai and Kaffa Perchi silk directly from Asian producers. The accounts of Marco Polo, while written in a narrative style, reflect the general reality of increased access to Eastern goods. Genoese and Venetian records corroborate the presence of Italian merchants operating in Mongol-controlled territories, securing supplies of raw silk and woven textiles. The Mongol Empire's administrative policies influenced local production outside China as well. Cities such as Samarkand, Bukh, and Merv already significant textile centers expand their operations under Mongol supervision. Excavated fragments from these regions show styles that blend Chinese patterns with Islamic motifs. This hybridization reflects increased cultural contact and the movement of artisans between regions. The decline of the Mongol Empire in the 14th century disrupts but does not eliminate the transcontinental silk trade. As successive states form in China, Persia, and the Golden Horde territories, trade routes become less secure, and the YAM system loses coherence. Nevertheless, the century of integration under Mongol rule leaves lasting effects. The knowledge of weaving techniques spreads farther. Merchants maintain contacts across regions. Political entities in Europe and the Middle East acquire direct experience with the management and distribution of silk goods. By the end of this period, silk has become a fully globalized commodity. It travels consistently across Eurasia, carried by merchants who rely on infrastructures established under Mongol rule. Its patterns, dyes, and techniques influence textile traditions from China to Italy, and its movement across continents demonstrates how a single material can reveal the administrative, economic, and cultural dynamics of an entire era. As the world transitions into the early modern period between the 5th, 10th, and 18th centuries, silk becomes a central component of expanding global trade networks. Maritime routes develop alongside overland corridors, and rising European merchant powers integrate silk into a commercial system that spans Asia, Africa, and the Americas. The materials movement becomes more structured, more extensively documented, and more deeply entwined with state policies and emerging financial institutions. China remains the largest producer of raw silk and finished textiles. Under the Ming Dynasty, official documents describe a system of tribute silk, household quotas, and regional specialization. Cities in the lower Yangtze region, particularly Suzhou, Hangzhou, and Nanjing, continue to produce high-quality textiles. Ming administrative codes outline tax obligations measured in silk bolts, indicating the material's continued role in fiscal operations. The state supports sericulture by issuing guidelines on mulberry cultivation and by maintaining official workshops that produce textiles for court use. At the same time, Japan develops its own silk economy. During the Muromachi and Edo periods, Japanese sericulture becomes more organized, with local domains supporting mulberry cultivation and weaving industries. Japanese silks differ from Chinese textiles in weave structure, dyeing techniques, and aesthetic motifs. They begin appearing in European markets through Portuguese and later Dutch merchants, who operate along the Nagasaki trade routes. Records kept by the Dutch East India Company list quantities of Japanese silk purchased for resale in Southeast Asia and Europe. In Persia, silk production reaches significant scale under the Safavid dynasty. The Safavid government promotes sericulture by establishing state-controlled workshops and by encouraging the planting of mulberry groves in regions such as Gilan and Mazan. Silk becomes one of the empire's most valuable exports. Armenian merchants, notably those from New Julfa near Isfahan, play a major role in transporting Persian silk to markets in the Ottoman Empire, Russia, and Western Europe. Their account books document routes, prices, and the distribution of silk across multiple urban centers. Ottoman territories also contribute to the early modern silk economy. Cities such as Bursa and Istanbul develop weaving workshops that incorporate influences from Byzantium, Persia, and Central Asia. The Ottoman government regulates silk production through guilds and tax systems, ensuring consistent quality. Bursa silks, including Kemha and Saresar, are known for their intricate designs and gold-wrapped threads. They appear in palace inventories and survive in museum collections, indicating their ceremonial and administrative importance. European demand for silk increases dramatically during this period. The Italian city-states, particularly Venice, Florence, and later Genoa, expand their silk industries. Florentine records from the 5th-10th century describe guild regulations, loom technologists, and the importation of raw silk from Asia. Italian workshops produce velvets, brocades, and damasks that circulate widely across European courts. Technical manuals written in Italian document weaving methods in detail, demonstrating the sophistication of local artisans. By the 17th century, France becomes a major silk producer. Under King Louis XIV, the city of Lyon emerges as a center of textile innovation. The French government supports silk production through subsidies, protective tariffs, and strict guild regulations. Workshop records from Lyon list the number of looms, types of fabrics produced, and the apprentices trained in specialized skills. French silks become known for their pictorial designs, often depicting flowers, architectural motifs, or allegorical scenes. European involvement in global trade introduces new dynamics. The Portuguese, Dutch, and later British East India companies carry silk across maritime routes, connecting Asia, Europe, and the Atlantic world. Cargo manifests preserved in company archives detail the quantities of raw silk, thread, and woven textiles transported on ships. These records show that silk becomes a regular part of commercial operations, traded alongside spices, porcelain, metals, and other valuable goods. The integration of silk into global finance also becomes evident. Bills of exchange issued by merchant banks facilitate international transactions. Insurance contracts cover the risks associated with long-distance transport. Port records in cities such as Amsterdam, London, and Lisbon catalog silk shipments and assess customs duties. The administrative language surrounding silk grows increasingly standardized, reflecting the importance of the textile within emerging capitalist systems. Silk's presence in colonial economies develops later. European colonial powers introduce sericulture experiments in new territories, including Bengal, the Philippines, and parts of the Americas. Some of these ventures achieve limited success, producing raw silk for European markets. Administrative reports from colonial officials describe attempts to establish mulberry plantations, organize labora, and implement weaving techniques. Although many projects encounter environmental or logistical challenges, they illustrate the global reach of silk-related knowledge. Technological changes emerge gradually. Improvements in loom design allow weavers to produce more complex patterns. Scientific studies of dyes enhance color stability. Printed manuals spread weaving knowledge across regions. These innovations contribute to the diversification of silk production and broaden the range of available textiles. Throughout the early modern period, silk remains a material shaped by regulation and administration. Governments assess taxes, restrict exports, impose quality standards, and monitor foreign merchants. Financial institutions track its value. Workshops maintain precise inventories. Merchants record the movement of silk across continents. These administrative tracers provide historians with detailed insight into the structure of early global trade. By the 18th century, the global silk economy is fully established. Asia remains the primary source of raw silk and technical expertise, while Europe develops sophisticated weaving industries. The interaction between these regions creates a system in which silk moves through multiple hands growers, spinners, dyers, weavers, merchants, and state officials before reaching its final users. This interconnected system sets the stage for the industrial transformations of the 19th century, when new technologies, synthetic fibers, and changing market demands will reshape the role of silk in the global economy. By the 19th century, the global silk economy enters a period of profound structural change. Industrialization alters every stage of textile production: spinning, weaving, dyeing, and distribution. New technologies appear alongside persistent traditional methods, creating a landscape in which manual craft and mechanized processes coexist. Governments, merchants, and manufacturers respond to shifting market demands while confronting unexpected challenges, including disease among silkworm populations and competition from emerging synthetic fibers. In Europe, industrial machinery plays a central role in transforming silk production. Tedraloom, used for centuries, becomes increasingly supplemented and, in some regions, replaced by the Jacquard loom, introduced in the early 19th century. This loom uses punch cards to control complex patterns, allowing a single weaver to produce designs that previously required multiple assistants. Workshops in Lyon, Manchester, Turin, and Basel adopt this technology, producing brocades and damasks with greater efficiency. Administrative records from guilds and textile companies document expenditures for machinery, training for workers, and the gradual restructuring of workshops around mechanized production. Raw silk supply becomes a critical concern. Europe depends heavily on imports from China, Japan, and the Ottoman Empire. Shipping manifests from Marseille, Liverpool, and Trieste bales of raw silk arriving in regular intervals, showing how deeply global supply chains have become embedded in industrial economies. At the same time, European governments attempt to expand sericulture domestically. France, Italy, and Austria-Hungary encourage mulberry cultivation and establish instructional schools to teach silkworm rearing. Manuals distributed to farmers provide guidance on feeding schedules, temperature control, and disease prevention. Despite these efforts, the silk industry faces a major crisis in the mid-19th century. A disease known as pabrini spreads rapidly among silkworm populations. First observed in France, the disease devastates mulberry growing regions and disrupts sericulture throughout Europe. Production levels fall sharply. Government reports record catastrophic losses, prompting officials to seek scientific solutions. The French chemist Louis Pasteur conducts detailed studies of the disease, developing methods to identify healthy silkworm eggs and prevent contamination. His work stabilizes sericulture in Europe, though not without long-term consequences for production structures and costs. While Europe grapples with disease, Japan becomes a major supplier of raw silk. During the late Edo period, and especially after the Meiji Restoration in 1868, Japan invests heavily in modernizing silk. The government promotes hybridization of silkworm breeds, constructs model flowchers, and encourages the export of high-quality raw silk. Statistical reports from the Meiji government show rapid increases in production, with silk becoming a major component of Japan's foreign trade. Japanese silk gains a reputation for uniformity and strength, meeting the demands of European and American manufacturers. China, long the world's primary silk producer, also experiences changes. Internal upheavals, including the Taiping Rebellion, disrupt production in some regions during the mid-19th century. However, sericulture continues in provinces such as Zhejiang, Jiangsu, and Sichuan. Overseas trade expands through treaty ports established after the Opium Wars, with Shanghai emerging as a major commercial hub. Customs records maintained by the Chinese Maritime Customs Service document the export of raw silk and woven textiles to Europe and North America. These records provide detailed data on quantities, prices, and destinations. Technological innovations extend beyond weaving machinery. New dyeing techniques emerged through the discovery of aniline dyes in the 1850s. These synthetic dyes offer a broader range of colors and greater stability than many natural dyes. Textile manufacturers adopt them rapidly, altering the appearance of silk fabrics. Trade journals from the period discuss experiments with defasteness, color intensity, and compatibility with different silk varieties. Although some traditional workshops continue to use natural dyes, industrial dyeing becomes a dominant practice by the late 19th century. Silk's role in global trade evolves accordingly. Joint stock companies, merchant firms, and international banks finance large-scale purchases of raw silk and regulate its movement across continents. Insurance contracts cover transoceanic shipments, while futures markets begin to emerge for silk in financial centers such as London and New York. These developments reflect a broader shift toward financial integration in the global economy. At the same time, new competition emerges. The invention of artificial fibers, including rayon, first developed in the late 19th century and introduces a material that imitates some qualities of silk but can be produced more cheaply and on a larger scale. Early forms of rayon are marketed as artificial silk. Although initially limited in quality, these fibers gradually improve and begin to influence market dynamics. Manufacturers reconsider production strategies, balancing demand for natural silk with interest in emerging synthetics. Despite these changes, traditional silk production remains significant. In rural regions of China, Japan, and India, sericulture continues largely unchanged. Families raise silkworms using methods refined over centuries, feeding them mulberry leaves gathered from local groves. Handweavers produce brocades, saris, and regional textiles using techniques passed down within communities. These parallel systems, industrial and traditional, define the early modern silk economy's complexity. Administrative records from the late 19th century highlight the coexistence of these systems. Government reports track industrial output, while agricultural surveys document rural trade statistics quantify exports and imports, and technical manuals describe mechanized weaving processes. Together, these sources illustrate how silk adapts to the pressures of modernization, while retaining its deep cultural and economic significance. By the end of the 19th century, Silk production spans multiple continents, supported by a combination of traditional labor, industrial technology, scientific research, and global finance. This transformation sets the stage for the modern silk industry, which will incorporate biotechnology, international standards, and a globally integrated market. By the 20th and 21st centuries, silk occupies a place shaped by science, industrial organization, and global economic integration. The material retains its historical significance, while adapting to new technologies and market systems. Scientific research refines silk. Manufacturers reorganize production around international supply chains, and communities preserve regional traditions, even as global markets shift. The modernization of sericulture begins with biological research. Scientists study silkworm genetics, disease resistance, and cocoon quality. Research institutes in China, Japan, India, and Europe conduct controlled breeding experiments, selecting strains that produce stronger fibers or yield larger cocoons. Agricultural manuals issued during the mid-20th century describe standardized methods for mulberry cultivation, feeding schedules, and temperature regulation in rearing houses. These manuals help stabilize production in regions long associated with China becomes the world's leading producer of raw silk. Government programs introduced during the 20th century expand mulberry cultivation, support rural sericulture households, and modernize reeling factories. Statistical yearbooks record raw silk output, export volumes, and geographical distribution across provinces. These records document how sericulture becomes integrated into national development plans, combining traditional knowledge with industrial processing. India emerges as another major producer. The Indian sericulture sector includes both mulberry and wild silks, such as tussa, eri, and mu. Each variety has distinct characteristics. Government reports detail extension programs that provide training, disease prevention assistance, and access to improved silkworm breeds. Cooperative societies help rural producers market their cocoons, while textile mills in Karnataka, West Bengal, and Assam process silk. For domestic and international markets, Japan, after its period of early industrial leadership, gradually shifts away from large-scale sericulture as economic priorities change. However, research institutes continue to contribute to silkworm genetics and silk biotechnology. Experimental breeding produces silkworms capable of spinning fibers with modified properties. These innovations reflect the increasingly scientific approach to understanding silk at the molecular level. The 20th century also sees advances in reeling and weaving technology. Automatic reeling machines improve precision and reduce labor requirements. Power looms replace many hand looms in industrial settings, allowing manufacturers to produce large quantities of uniform fabric. Trade journals document the adoption of these machines, including technical specifications and production statistics. Despite mechanization, handweaving continues in regions with strong craft traditions, maintaining techniques that date back centuries. Synthetic fibers introduce structural changes to the market. Rayon, nylon, and polyester provide alternatives to natural silk, often at lower cost. Manufacturers use these materials in garments, furnishings, and industrial textiles. Market analyses compare production costs, fiber, strength, and durability between natural and synthetic materials. Although synthetic fibers reduce silk's dominance in global textiles, they do not replace it entirely. Natural silk maintains a stable position in luxury markets, cultural garments, and specialized industrial applications. Silk also enters new scientific fields. Researchers explore its biomedical uses due to the fiber's biocompatibility and mechanical properties. Silk fibroin, a protein extracted from cocoons, is studied for use in surgical sutures, tissue scaffolds, and controlled drug delivery systems. Laboratory publications detail experiments on fiber dissolution, protein restructuring, and mechanical strength. These developments reflect a shift from silk as a primarily decorative material to one with technical applications. In the cultural sphere, silk retains deep significance. Traditional garments such as Chinese kipo, Japanese kimono, Indian saris, and Central Asian ikat robes continue to rely on silk. Many regions preserve specialized weaving techniques passed through generations. Museums catalog historical and modern textiles, analyzing thread counts, patterns, dye composition, and loom technology. Exhibition catalogs often place contemporary weavers within the larger historical continuum of global silk production. International trade organizations monitor silk markets in the modern era. Reports from the International Sericultural Commission and the Food and Agriculture Organization track global production, export trends, and technological developments. These datasets show fluctuations caused by economic conditions, labor availability, climate patterns, and international demand. They also record collaborations among countries aimed at improving sericulture sustainability. Environmental considerations influence modern sericulture as well. Sustainable mulberry cultivation, reduced pesticide use, and eco-friendly dyeing methods become priorities for many producers. Some regions adopt organic sericulture practices documented through certification programs and agricultural reports. These practices respond to broader global interest in environmentally responsible textile production. Global supply chains connect producers, processors, and markets. Raw silk from China or India may be reeled locally, woven in Europe, and sold in North American or Middle Eastern markets. Trade agreements and tariffs shape the movement of silk across borders. Customs data provide detailed records of export values, import quantities, and dominant textile categories. These sources demonstrate how silk functions as part of an interconnected economic system. Digital technology introduces new forms of documentation. Online marketplaces display silk products from diverse regions, expanding access to global consumers. Digital archives preserve historical textiles and provide research tools for scholars. These resources allow detailed examination of weaving patterns, dye compositions, and loom structures without requiring physical handling of fragile objects. In the modern world, silk stands at the intersection of tradition and innovation. Its global production involves rural households, industrial factories, scientific laboratories, and international markets. Techniques developed thousands of years ago remain relevant, yet they now coexist with advanced biotechnology and automated manufacturing. Throughout its long history, silk has adapted to changing political structures, economic systems, and technological advances. Its continued presence in global culture reflects both its material properties and its deep historical roots. With this section, the narrative reaches the contemporary moment, completing the long arc of silk's development across civilizations. Across more than 5 millennia, silk traces a continuous line through the development of global history. It begins in the river plains of Neolithic China, where early communities experiment with mulberry cultivation and the domestication of the silkworm. Over time, these practices form a structured system of production that supports dynasties, regional economies, and administrative institutions. Archaeological evidence from early Chinese cities shows the steady refinement of weaving, dyeing, and reeling techniques that become foundational to later textile traditions. As silk moves westward, it enters the diplomatic and commercial networks of the ancient world. It becomes a valued commodity in Persia, the Mediterranean, and India, carried by merchants who operate along caravan routes linking distant regions. The establishment of the Silk Road creates a corridor through which goods, technologies, and administrative methods circulate. Throughout these exchanges, silk remains both a practical material and a resource with economic significance. Byzantium institutionalizes silk production through state-controlled workshops, integrating textile manufacture into its administrative structure. The Islamic caliphates expand the industry further, constructing new weaving centers and coordinating trade across regions that span from Central Asia to the Mediterranean. In medieval Europe, guilds adapt and reorganize silk manufacture, creating new centers of production and trade. The Mongol Empire connects these worlds through a transcontinental system of communication and security, allowing silk to circulate with unprecedented regularity. Early modern states integrate silk into global maritime trade, while industrialization introduces new machinery, scientific approaches, and competition from synthetic fibers. Modern sericulture combines traditional knowledge with biotechnology, global markets, and digital documentation. Across these transformations, silk remains a material shaped by human organization. It reflects agricultural systems, technological innovation, administrative control, and long-distance exchange. Its history provides a clear record of how societies structure production, measure value, and connect across continents.